So, Albert, here he is, Albert Daba, the writer, the director, the executive producer, the actor in this movie. And it's an extraordinary movie, as we all feel when we watch it. But I don't think a lot of people know it's your story.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a story I've been working on for many years. I put it down at times, and it all started when it was actually a bit after my brother passed away, and it was about 3 years after that I found myself really feeling like, what happened? And I was having some problems, I was seeing a woman, and I was having some intimacy problems with her. I was only about 21, 22.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in Brooklyn College, and we had this, I always called it the sex therapist, because it was this 200 class, people in the class, like a real, in Brooklyn College. And I went up to her one day. She was really kind of hot and sexy, and I said to her, Mickey, I'm having this problem, and blah, blah, blah. She says, I see this therapist named Bill. Why don't you go see him? So that was the first time I went into therapy, and I went with him for about 5 years, and we talked a lot about what happened in my family and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things I remember he always said to me, because I was a little afraid that I was going to turn out like that. I felt very guilty, and my brother happened to be diagnosed schizophrenic.
Mm-hmm. As Morris is in the film.
Yes. And and he talked about like, I said, am I normal? And he said, normalcy is a matter of relativity, what's normal? And he was a very good guy. And then the therapy, I think I saw him 4 or 5 years, and we finished. And he one day had said to me, why don't you write the story? Because he liked the way I described everything, I guess. And I then called him about a year later and said, Bill, you had mentioned to me about writing a story about it, and I know you wrote a book on psychology, and so we talked about it. And first he said, that sounds like a good idea, but he spoke to some colleagues, and they suggested maybe it's not such a good idea because you were his patient and blah, blah, blah. But we met together, and he said, why don't we work on an outline? So we met for about 5 times, and we wrote out an outline
Mm-hmm.
of what I had told him, what he remembered. And then I put it away. And then I started writing it and and then I wrote an outline, and then I was trying to get someone to write it. And I was seeing many different directors coming into my studio,
Mm-hmm.
like Ron Howard. At one point, I gave it to him, and he says, I can't take it because I can't take unsolicited stuff. But I don't know if you remember Gary Goldberg, who
I do.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he was by our place, and I gave it to him to read. And he was friendly with a good friend of mine, and they were best friends. And the casting director I was working with, Gary, said, don't give it to him, send it to his studio. But his friend said, no, just give it to him. Gary's a great guy. Just hand it to him. Say, hey. So I gave it to Gary, and it was on a Friday, and the casting director got a little pissed at me, like, why did you give it to him? I told you not to. And he was because he's going on a trip to Europe on Monday, and it was a Friday. So
He could read it on the plane.
well, he read it, I think, in the taxi, because Monday morning I got a message from him saying, this could be good, it could be terrible, but you just have to write it. That's what he said. And I gave it to her, and I said, hey, take a look at this. He got back. So he was a very sweet guy. So I started working on it, and I wrote 12 different drafts. I had so many different beginnings and so many different endings. And finally, I got to the point where I felt, this is it. I tinkered with it after that, but I felt like and I had other people read it. I had friends, other writers, just people I would meet sometimes. And one professor of film told me, if you hear a lot of people are telling you the same thing about one particular scene or incident, maybe that's something you should look at.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously everyone's going to have another opinion. So that's how I kind of learned how to do it. And I took one screenwriting weekend class. And
That was it.
Yeah. That was it.
See, that's an inspiration for everyone.
I think so, because I think someone just told me you just have to write.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's true.
and write from your heart. And afterwards, I took these, but the script was already written. I ended up taking up in Kripalu in the Berkshires, there was a screenwriting. It was called Writing Your Memoir, Speaking from Your Heart, by a woman named Nancy. And it was finished, but I had her read it, and she really loved the script. And I've taken about 4 classes with her, like week-long classes, just to keep up that whole creativity of writing.
But the feeling, the emotion that's in it coming from you, I think everybody who has just watched this movie wants to know just how true it is.
Yeah.
What are the details of it? I'm assuming you grew up wanting to play baseball. We can start with that.
Yes. I was really addicted to baseball. I love baseball. And I didn't realize that I really got, until I was writing the script, that I really got baseball from my brother. As little as he spoke to me, he was actually 12 years older than me. He would only speak to me about baseball so passionately, like as in the film. He talks about baseball from before the times he was a kid, what he read about it, what he says about Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb, and he spoke with such passion. So I started playing baseball, and I was good at it, and I ended up, I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player, and here I am coming from a Syrian Jewish Orthodox background, which was not what my father had in mind. But I did play
As
through
we
college.
see from the film.
Yes.
Yes.
But I did get to play through college. So that was a wonderful experience. And I'm a huge baseball fan. And I passed it on to my kids. They love baseball too.
Yeah, that place of love again doing it. But I want to know what it does to you, who is not a professional actor, to take on the part of your own father in this movie and to play him in all those complexities. Because even though I laugh at the line, he's every Syrian Jewish father, nobody can be all of that. Everybody has their own individual thing. Was it painful? Was it painful to relive all this through this movie that you were writing, directing, and acting in?
Yes, there were many moments that were really painful. Not a scene I was in, but the first thing that comes to my mind when we shot the scene with the young boy who was, me as a youngster. We shot it when he's in the room talking to his brother about the game he just played of baseball and how much he loved it. And we actually shot it we shot the film 10 days in my grandmother's house, which then belonged to my aunt. So it was perfect because it looked like it was right out of the 60s. And we lived 3 blocks away from there. My brother died 3 blocks away where we lived in a house right nearby. So we did a rehearsal of that scene before we shot it. And I remember the crew and everyone being so silent. And I felt the emotion in that room that it was hard for me to say cut before we were going to shoot it. And I said, I got to leave for a minute. And I went and I walked out of the house, and I walked for about 5 blocks. And that's when I realized this happened right over here where my brother died. And that was one of the most emotional parts of the film for me. In playing my father, one of the most difficult parts was talking about when he said to his son, "I'll disown you if you stay with this girl or if you marry a non-Jewish girl." Because I kept thinking to myself, what did that feel like for him to say that? And in one of the takes, I got very emotional after I said that. And actually, the editor, who I love, the editor, Ray Hubley, he kept part of that in there, and then he cut it. And I, I thought it was a great cut because it wasn't so much about me, how I felt, but it was more to me about how the son reacted when he says, "You don't even know me." And then that's the way I felt about it. Like the father really never knew who his son was.
You never went to a baseball game.
Never went to a game, and that's the truth. And that always hurt, and because it was my passion, and I I went to graduate school for social work, and because I got this job when I was a senior in Brooklyn College, and everyone was encouraging me to go on to graduate school, but I hated school, quite frankly. I just thought about playing baseball, and I played as much as I could, and my grade point average was 2.2, and I go, how am I going to get into graduate school? So
It's not a good grade point there.
well, I'm telling everybody this right now.
There it is. There it is. But people watching the movie too are going to say, did you pursue this professional career as a baseball player? When did it stop that you didn't do it?
It stopped after college. I didn't get drafted by any team, and
That's a context clue, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not working out.
It's not working out.
Yeah.
So, but the one thing I love is I did pass it on to my son, and he also played through college, but he was a much better player than I was. And my kids I have 3 kids, and we always go. I have season tickets for the Yankees, and they rotate. We always go.
It's
and
still there.
It's very
It's
there.
in the DNA.
Yeah.
In a good way. You can't really see this movie and be somebody who has no passionate response to it. That's the great thing about it. I see a lot of movies where they're Hollywood formula, and the movie's over, and you say to your friends or your wife and husband, where do we go eat? Here, you want to talk about this.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because what I find the most exciting thing about the movie now is showing it to a live audience and doing a talk back and a Q&A. I find it's like just open discussion, and people are opening up. One woman gets up in one of these talkbacks and says, I never said this before, but watching this film, I have to come out and say this. My brother was schizophrenic, and she was with her mother, and they came up to me afterwards and talked to me, and I asked the mother, what happened to your son? And tragically, they found him dead on the street one day. In London, I'll never forget, there wasn't a big crowd. I don't know how they advertised it, but I believe in 6 screenings, there was a total of 35 people that showed up. So when I saw it, there was just 5 people in the audience. But what struck me so much was they introduced me before the film that I was the filmmaker. So I'm walking out at the end of the film, and this woman, who was probably in her 60s, walks towards me with her arms wide open, like I've never seen, and gives me this tremendous hug and holds on to me. And her husband's right beside her. And she goes, what a beautiful mitzvah you have done. What a great film you've just put together. And then her husband says, he says, I'm 54, I'm a doctor, and I lost my best friend who was a doctor at 44 to suicide. And then we talked about it. So stuff like that would come up. And I see how many people how much suicide affects people, and how many people, it affects everyone to some degree.
Oh, yes, because the people that are still living have to cope with that. But I think people watching this movie want to know more about what they can do. There's this organization, SAVE, too.
SAVE, yes. It's basically they're about education and saving lives and reducing the stigma of mental illness. So we were calling a lot of mental health places at one point to get basically a partner. And this amazing gentleman named Dr. Dan Reidenberg, first I spoke to his assistant, and then he gets on the phone. I explained to him about the film. He seemed very interested. He goes, I'm going to be in New York next week. Could you send me the script? I sent him the script. He came to my office right here, and we talked for a little bit, and then finally I said, so what'd you think of the script? His first response was, well, there was a typo on page 110.
Great.
So
That's
I said,
what all writers love to hear when we want an emotional response.
we should have checked that.
Check that, right.
So then he said, Albert, I really love the script. I felt it was authentic. I get asked all the time by directors, writers, authors for books, commercials, documentaries, features, to be a partner with a film, meaning a fiscal partner that we can open it up for donations, and they're a 501c3. But more than that, for me, it was a validation of all the work I put in. And then when we finished it, again, he's in Minnesota, I said, I can send you a link, but I'd rather you see it on a big screen, so let me know what you think. He goes, I'm going to go with you, Albert. I'll wait till I'm, come to New York. And I had a special screening that he was there, and he loved it.
But you bring up a really, I think, interesting and profound point about the stigma. Because if people come into this movie, they have no experience of suicide except out of the movies, not in their own families. They don't know what to do. Other people have. They know somebody or they did it. Nobody knows, and I'm speaking for myself, what to do about those feelings. Where do they go? The guilt that you might feel because you couldn't save somebody who did this. What can people who are feeling these things after seeing your movie do?
Well, I think what I hope for people to do is to better understand it. It's like trying to think of what it's like to be in someone else's shoes and to be more empathic when you speak to a friend or someone you might know and they say something that you go, that sounds a little strange or a little off. And the best thing, which I heard a therapist say at one of our talkbacks, was if there is because someone asked me, if someone sees this film and is very depressed, how can this help me? How could the film help me? So she said, what you want to do is talk to that person and ask them what they need. And if the person says, I need to eat like 10 gallons of chocolate mint ice cream right now, all right, let's do it. And the idea she's saying is to be vulnerable with them, to try to get to the point where they're feeling, like to open up, to help them open up. And I believe that has gotten me to where I am, is that when I can talk to someone and open up, it gives them the opportunity and again to open up about themselves if they feel like it. They may not, but if I feel like there's something behind it, I might ask them a little deeper.
I think that's what this movie does. People can't see it, like I was saying before, without wanting to talk to somebody about it afterwards. You want to deal with those feelings that they raise. And yet, there's something hopeful about Extra Innings. That's why I love the title. It's in a sense that it's not over. We think it's over, but it's not. Is that where it comes from?
Well, it's so interesting you say that because, so I've studied acting on and off, and I studied, the last teacher I studied with was Terry Schreiber, who's a wonderful man. While I was studying with him, I went to him once, and I loved acting, and I said, Terry, I don't know how I come off as an actor. It's so hard to tell. I love it, but I don't know. I've been away from it, and now I'm back into it. He goes, there's this guy named Sam Christensen, who, by the way, recently passed away. And he says he does these, he's a casting director out of LA, but he specializes in doing seminars on how one can see himself. So I took this seminar. It was like only 8 people, and it was 4 straight days with Sam. And it was one of the most wonderful experiences I ever had. He talked about as an actor has a palette to work from and, choosing the colors. But the bottom line was he gave everyone a couple of sentences of how they see you. And one of them was, for me, you know what I love, Extra Innings. And I was like, oh, what is, like, he would explain that. He goes, you have such a passion for the game of baseball, but for you it's hope. It's life goes on. And I had an original title for this that I never liked. And then one day I just was sitting and thinking, and all of a sudden it popped into my head, Extra Innings. And I started telling people, and everyone said, well, that's a great title. So I went to, Sam would have these like, if you took this 4-day, you could, every 3 or 4 months you'd come to New York and you can go and see him. He'd have like a refresher course or something. But I would happen to be in LA, and I went to his studio when he was having one. And I was a little late. It was in the Valley. I got a little lost. And I get there, and he had a big place. There must have been about 125 people sitting down in the theater, and he's talking, and I'm trying to walk very slowly so I won't interrupt. And he sees me and he goes, "Hey, Albert, how you doing?" And I go, "Good, Sam, how are you?" So we talked, and then afterwards I went and told him, "Sam, I got to tell you, he had read the script," and I said, I changed the name to Extra Innings. He goes, "Wow, that is beautiful." So to me, it shows that life goes on, there's hope, anything can happen. And, to take the parable of, a baseball game, it's like it goes on, there's no time limit, you never know when it's going to end. And that's one of the reasons why I love baseball.
It's just the two things come together so
Yeah.
beautifully.
Yeah.
But I think everybody's asking that question that I'm going to ask you now, because you've done this. Is there going to be more from you? Is there going to be an Extra Innings 2? Are we going to find out what happened to you, even though you call yourself David in the movie? Are we going to find out more? What has this done to you as a person, as a human being, in terms of wanting to continue?
Well, first of all, it felt great to complete this. And the first time I showed it to was cast and crew and friends and family, it was really a truly an experience I'll never forget, because I had friends that knew I was working on this for years.
Well, sure, but also family and
Family,
friends. I mean,
right.
I don't know how many of your family are still around and with us, but did they see this and have reaction?
My older my sister, who's 5 years older than me, my
Mm-hmm.
parents have deceased. She didn't want me. She read the script and she said, "You can't do this movie." She was
There's
very against it.
encouragement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
She says, listen to this, she has 7 kids and 60 grandchildren, 60, and 38 great-grandchildren. And her fear was that if people knew it was our family, her grandchildren wouldn't be able to get married.
Whoa, it's that same sweeping under the rug feeling. Yeah.
And she never told her kids about it. She told me she did, but she didn't. She never told them they committed suicide. So we talked a lot about it. And then, so she finally, I showed her the movie in her house on the computer the first time. But I said, you have to have 2 hours where you're not going to get interrupted, because she's always interrupted. She said, okay. So the first time she sees her character, she's wearing a sleeveless dress. She yells out, "I never would have worn that." And I'm going, well, that's the least of what you're going to object to in this.
The regular critics are nothing compared to this. Wow.
So I got a really wonderful reaction. I felt really good about it. People were calling me the next day and saying, "I couldn't believe you finally did it. You've been working on this for so long, and I love the way this and that happened." And some people said, "I never knew this happened in your family." So as I was finishing the film, I started writing notes about another film, but I put them down for now. And it's really about relationships, but it would be about relationships that I've been through, kind of going from, regular dating to online dating to getting married, getting divorced. I would love to do something like that one day.
It's still you.
It's
You
still
still
me.
lived it. You
Yes.
want to write about what you know, don't you?
Well, I think that's, when you can write something that and you can put your heart into it. And I've noticed people saying to me they really love when they see it's based on a true story.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it still has to be good, but it makes it easier for me, I think, to write.
What's the best reaction that you can imagine for an audience to have to Extra Innings?
Well, I had one real nice reaction, like from my ego.
Well, we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Let's have one of those.
Well, in
not
New
from your
Orleans,
sister.
Yeah, talking about in New Orleans, at the end of a talk back, this one man stands up. He says, "I don't have a question. I just want to say that what you just did, what you just showed, was so courageous of you to put yourself out like you did on the screen." And then everybody applauded. And for me, I remember thinking, courageous? Because I never thought of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was putting myself out there, but the word courageous really hit me, because I You know what I just thought of when I'm saying courageous? I just thought of Kirk Douglas. I've always
Courageous and Kirk Douglas. It's Spartacus.
Exactly.
Right? That's what's happened.
My favorite film of all
There
time
it
is
goes.
Spartacus,
Yes.
yeah.
I am Spartacus. And everybody can watch this and say that same thing. But
Yes.
that's a really good point about it. You know, I think now, speaking for everybody out there that has just watched this movie and felt it, that we all, and I'm going to say it myself for them, is that you've given us a movie not only to think about, but to feel about. And in this world that I spend my life watching movies, where they don't do that, where it's basically just escapism, you've made a movie that's entertaining. I don't want to, because this movie there's a lot of scenes in it that are just hilarious in terms of the family dynamic.
Right.
Well, everything else happens, but you have, Albert, made a movie that matters. So I congratulate you for it.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I really appreciate it, Peter.
Yes, this was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.